From WFRV Local 5, your local election headquarters. This is Newsmaker Sunday.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Newsmaker Sunday. I'm Tom Zalaski. Well, plenty of eyes are on the 8th Congressional District in Wisconsin following Mike Gallagher's resignation. But there is another big race we are keeping a close eye on. That is Congressman Glenn Grothman, who is seeking his 6th term in District 6, a district which has been dominated by Republicans for some 60 years now. Grothman's Democratic opponent, this time around, former lawyer John Zarbano. And joining us this morning, the incumbent Congressman, Representative Glenn Grothman. Congressman, thanks so much for being here. Good to have you back.
Tom, it's great to be on the show.
You're and this is a repeat performance for you, number 6 attempt going back for Congress.
Correct.
What was the trigger that made you decide I want to do this again?
A chance to be interviewed by you, Tom, but it's not. That's not just that.
I hope there's more than that.
There are major issues that our country is facing that I think, quite frankly, are getting worse. We have a situation at the border, which even today, over 150,000 people a month are coming there. In the fiscal year, or in the year that just wrapped up, when we get the numbers, I think we're going to see 5 or 6 times as many people crossing the border next year as in Trump's final year. And it's got to be addressed. The second thing is both the debt and inflation caused by out-of-control spending. We normally pass appropriation bills every December of about $1.7 billion. During his first term in office, President Biden passed 3 other bills, in addition to that, averaging over $1 trillion a year. So obviously we have debt that's going to be just a huge burden on the next generation. And in addition to the debt, we have interest exploding, spending more on interest now than either national defense or Medicare. Unbelievable, or at least more than national defense. And we have a situation in which inflation, which was predicted when you pass 3 such big bills out there. So we need somebody who's a fiscal conservative in Washington at this time. And finally, the reason I initially ran, our welfare program, still out of control. President Biden is trying to expand the amount of money there. Our welfare system right now discourages work and discourages marriage. That's something else we have to look at.
Going back to that first term, had you ever envisioned going for a 6th term?
I would have thought we would have got more progress right now. What happened is, quite frankly, under President Trump's first term, we didn't get done as much as I had anticipated. Mm-hmm. I think there was friction among different Republicans out there. That was part of the problem. And President Trump did a good job, but I don't think some of these issues I just mentioned he anticipated would be this big of a problem.
You've got a lot of experience as a lawmaker, not just in Congress, but also a state lawmaker, Assembly, Senate. What outside of the political world was your area of expertise?
Oh, years ago I was a lawyer.
Yep.
We dealt with taxes, which I think is very important here. We dealt with real estate law, and we dealt with probate. So I got to meet a lot of people, and quite frankly, dealt a lot with the government as a lawyer. You know, when you're dealing with things like taxes or real estate, you keep bumping up to the government and seeing sometimes the lack of common sense we have in the government. So I felt my legal career has helped me a lot. Not to mention, as a lawyer, sometimes people, they pass a new law and they think it's going to solve all sorts of problems. I look at it and say, no, this law is going to cause more problems than it is solutions, which I think helps me be a better legislator as well.
Now, you go back a long way. People may have forgotten. You succeeded Tom Petri.
Absolutely.
That's been way back. In your times that you won your congressional races, you've always won by between 10 points, 20 points, in between that range. What, in your mind, is the attraction for your constituents to put you back in Congress with those kinds of numbers?
Well, I think I am somewhat unique in that the issues that I'm fighting on, I don't think they're bringing up enough in Washington. For example, the welfare system. It's a little disappointing to me it's not being used by more candidates on a federal level, but when you are paying people maybe $20,000, $25,000 a year not to get married, that's something you ought to have addressed. I've been out in front of it. I'm meeting with Robert Rector, the man who's still around Washington, who dealt with the welfare reforms of the 1990s. So I think I'm somewhat unique there. I have, back to my state legislative days, been concerned about preferences, affirmative action, that sort of thing. Under the Biden administration, this has become a bigger problem, where we're giving government contracts or government hiring to people based upon where their ancestors are from, rather than just saying, let's take the best guy for the job. And I think that's unnecessarily divisive. But again, it's an issue I dealt with a little on a state level, and I began to learn about anecdotes there that I'm able to carry with me to Washington. And quite frankly, a lot of legislators are afraid even to address those issues.
We have much more to come with Congressman Glenn Grothman right after this, so please stay right there. And welcome back to Newsmaker Sunday. Our guest this morning, we are honored to have congressional candidate and current Congressman Glenn Grothman, who is seeking re-election in the 6th Congressional District in Wisconsin. Mentioned immigration earlier on in the broadcast. You've been to the border. What did you see? What were your impressions?
Well, first of all, it's the sheer volume of people coming across. Until recently, there was 1 month we hit over 350,000 coming across in 1 month. You see people from all around the globe. It depends on the border where you set up. There are times where it seems like it was primarily Brazilian. There was a time in San Diego when the second most common nationality was Russian. You really realize you're getting people from all around the globe. Secondly, you realize these are not necessarily starving people. Okay, if you look at the clothes people have, if you look at how well fed they look, you realize you're not dealing with people on their last legs. They, as the Border Patrol will point out to you, you're largely dealing with people who just want to make more money here than you are in, say, Guatemala or Brazil or somewhere. And you see so many young people. Every month, 7,000 or 8,000 unaccompanied minors without either mom or dad there, and that's kind of scary. We wouldn't allow that in the United States, right? If you had a 9-year-old kid and you just said, here, Johnny, there's the airport, off you go, we'd say, what in the world is going on here? But we routinely allow that with these kids coming across the southern border, which I think is also wrong.
So have you formulated your own opinion as to what we should do down there?
Well, you got to go back to the return in Mexico policy, and that'll solve most of the problem. A lot of these people coming across, they're paying 10, 20,000. I found out an anecdote from somebody from India. Somebody paid 70 grand to get here from India. These people then show up and they hope that they eventually get an asylum hearing and they're allowed to come here. But if we said you've got to stay in Mexico pending that hearing, nobody's going to pay $10 or $20 or even $70,000 not knowing if you're going to be let in, unless you really have a huge asylum problem, which very few people do. So that would solve most of your problems. I would like to see us not allow unaccompanied minors come here and send them back to their country of origin, which would solve another problem. People talk about keeping children away from their parents. That's what we're doing right now. Even if Johnny shows up with one parent, where's the other parent? If you have divorces in this country, frequently they try to keep both parents involved in that child's life. When somebody comes up here and one parent is left in Nicaragua or something, is Johnny ever going to see his mom or dad again? Who knows? That's another thing we have to put an end to.
Congress had that one piece of bipartisan legislation. The rap was that Trump nixed it because it would make Joe Biden look good. Was that the case? Was it presidential politics, or was there something in that bill that really was flawed?
No. Oh, it was flawed because we're still letting way too many people come here. Something that would be intolerable. If, this is a myth that the Democrats have put out there. If you look at when Donald Trump publicly disagreed with that law, there were all sorts of Republicans who disagreed with it in the first place. Years ago, before he got to Congress, there was a so-called bipartisan bill. And when the public weighed in and they found out how many people were coming across under the bipartisan bill, that bill died. The same thing was here. It was a poorly drafted bill by a senator who on a personal level is a nice guy, but I think he was just eager out of his mind to say, I'm the hero, I drafted the bill. And then the other senators looked at it, the other congressmen looked at it and said, hey, wait a minute, this is still going to allow way too many people across. So this wasn't dying because of Donald Trump. It was dying because the vast majority of Republicans are like, hey, wait a minute, we don't want people just coming in here, and this bill allows way too much of that even if it would pass.
Let me hit on a couple of other international questions. Ukraine and Russia, are we doing enough to help Ukraine, or should we back off?
Well, the big problem in Ukraine is the Biden administration is not negotiating a peace. Every war ends eventually. But if you talk to the Biden people, they have no plan to end the war. And it should be easy to end, hypothetically, I think, Ukraine does not have enough young people, much less young people to fight this war. Ukraine has the second lowest birth rate in the world. Russia has a low birth rate and is losing tons of young people to, among other things, this country. So they should both want to keep their young people alive, not fighting in a war. I would hope the United States would push some neutral country. Israel right now has its hands full, but maybe Turkey, maybe France, to negotiate an end. It would be an end that everybody's thrilled with, but at least we'd stop the killing. Look at the Korean War. President Eisenhower, to get that done, somebody must negotiate with Mao Zedong, one of the greatest mass murderers of all time. But we ended that war in the 50s. There's been peace there for another 70 years. There's no reason that we cannot negotiate a peace here, not just to save money, but primarily to save the lives of soldiers from these two countries who have a shortage of young people as is.
Congressman Glenn Grothman, our special guest this morning. We have much more to come when we come back. Stay right there. Back now with Republican Congressman Glenn Grothman, seeking term number 6, representing the 6th District. Hot button issues going into this election. Inflation, always the big topic. Where do you put the blame? I know you talked earlier about the overspending.
Right.
Where do you blame?
That's where it comes from. You know, there were 3 huge bills that were passed soon after President Biden took office. And 2 of the 3 for over $1 trillion. The one they argued at the time, but eventually I think people would agree was over $1 trillion. We normally have a budget of appropriation bills of 1.7 trillion. You have 3 other bills like that weren't paid for. It was predicted, even by economists who advised President Obama, that this is a mistake. What is going to happen when you're spending, $1.2 trillion additional? And so what happened was predictable. Inflation. Like night follows day, you're going to get inflation if you spend that much additional money, which is going to drive the country that much more in debt. And of course, the Federal Reserve winds up printing money to pay for it. There's your inflation. And you also have this kind of anti-American producing energy. Be it petroleum, be it natural gas. When we produce less, the cost of energy is going to go up. And that affects a lot more than just your heat bill or your filling up at the gas tank. That goes into fertilizer, plastics, everything, and that drives up the cost of other things as well.
In this upcoming presidential election, one of the bigger issues is going to be abortion. Where are you on abortion?
I've always been pro-life, but I'll tell you, President Trump has made it clear on a federal level that we're not going to be doing anything. So quite frankly, I'm not planning any bills on that for the next 4 years, because President Trump, if he's the Republican president, he's not going to push anything. And it's a tragedy. I think there are other things we can do to hold down abortions. I was reading an article recently, more people getting married, less abortions. So if we can change the welfare system and have more people getting married, that'll save a lot of lives. But as far as legislation, for 4 years, it's going to, at least as long as President Trump's around, not a lot of action.
Give me some idea, if there is a second Trump presidency, what does this country look like? What will we expect to see?
I think the first thing will be on the energy front, right? Which will be more jobs for Americans and hold down the cost of energy. That's number one. Number two, the budget is out of control. We're already working behind the scenes, both at mandatory and discretionary spending, to hold those things down. I'd like to focus on things that really are never the federal government's business anyway, push them back to a state level. It's something we have to do. When we say our interest on our debt is greater than what we're spending on national defense, that should concern every American. But I think you are going to see in our regular budget and in other parts of the budget that you refer to as mandatory spending, there will be significant reductions. We're going to hit the ground running. I think Congress will be a lot more prepared if President Trump wins for President Trump than we were 4 years ago. So those are two things that I'd like to see. On a personal level, I'd like to see welfare reform. I'm trying to work behind the scenes, particularly with some of the women legislators, to come up with proposals that get rid of this marriage penalty. I mean, there was a time in this country when you and I were younger where it was somewhat rare to have a child born without a mother and father at home.
Right. Yep.
Now it's so common, and that's not something that just happened. It happened because of flaws in the Great Society programs of the 60s.
We are back to wrap up with Congressman Glenn Grothman right after this, so please stay with us. We are back with Congressman Glenn Grothman as he seeks another term in Washington. Your opponent, John Zarbano, he has, and I quote him here, says that you are Trump's #1 loyalist in Congress. Unfair criticism, or do you take that as a compliment?
Well, I don't know how you'd say that. I mean, I've certainly disagreed with him. I had to disagree with him, When President Trump tried to give everybody a $2,500 check on his way out the door, I disagreed with him on that. Obviously, you can see I feel the welfare system has to be reformed. It's not something you hear President Trump talk about. I've talked about him with his staff, so there's an example of me pushing something that he's not pushing. Same thing with these racial preferences. I'm out in front on that issue. I talk about it all the time. I don't hear President Trump talk about it. So certainly am independent with President Trump when I have to be. On the other hand, when I look at Kamala Harris, I think that would be very scary for the country, and I'm doing all I can right now to make sure President Trump gets elected again.
Outside of getting President Trump reelected, what's top of mind for you? What's on the top of your agenda, topic A?
Well, I think we need to look at the welfare system because that leads to so many people not working. I think it leads to depression. I think it leads to the breakdown of the family. And if there's something that I am going out of my way to push in Washington, that's it. The committee that I'm on, I'm a subcommittee chair, deals with the border and deals with national defense. And I've also focused a little bit on waste in national defense. A lot of people feel because national defense is so important, we can't be critical of it. I've gone out of the way to hold hearings on places. Our Department of Defense hasn't submitted an audit since the 1990s, which is out of control. I think I'm somewhat of a unique legislator in that I'm not afraid to take on the waste that's going on.
In the Middle East, it escalates seemingly every single day. Do you see a person, a country, someone stepping in to quell the violence, or is this just out of control and it's got to play itself out?
Well, no, I think the United States is kind of weighing in behind the scenes. We have to allow Israel to clean out Gaza. You know, what happened down there in Gaza is worse than what you're hearing on in the news media. The things they did to people, the people that they targeted were horrific, so Israel's got to clean that up. In Lebanon, thousands of missiles, which have been pointed at Israel all along, they've been shooting them intermittently. People don't talk about the tens of thousands of Israelis in northern Israel who haven't been able to go home for months. So they have no choice but to clean that up. I do not believe in the end that these countries really want an all-out war with Israel because Israel would destroy them, right? But Israel does have to fire back. Rockets shot over from Iran. Well, can you allow that to be not addressed? Certainly in our country, if Cuba, if Venezuela began to shoot missiles into the southeast United States, shouldn't we have to do something? Of course we could. But I believe that the huge amount of strength of the Israeli army will prevent this becoming an all-out war because these other countries know in an all-out war they would lose.
Your party is in control of the House right now, but you do have a rebel faction in there. Is there any effort to bring that faction more in line with folks like yourself?
Well, I think there's some people in Congress, not surprising, who like to get on TV. And I think that's a little bit what motivates them. We had an effort recently to get rid of our second speaker this session, Mike Johnson, and I think it was 12 Republican congressmen voted to get rid of him. If the Democrats had gone along with it, they could have put the Republicans in array. So what happened is our speaker had a make a deal with the Democrats to remain Speaker. Obviously, that's not ideal. It's something that never would happen in the Wisconsin legislature, historically wouldn't. And I wish I could get more of my colleagues to focus on accomplishing policy goals rather than doing things that get them in the news.
Congressman, I've got about 1 minute for you to give your speech as to why Glenn Grothman should be returned to Congress for term number 6.
I've got experience when I look at the big goals, and I have some lesser goals too that I want to accomplish, but dealing with the welfare system, closing the border, spending less money to get this inflation under control, and having more energy production. Do something about this racial divisiveness that I think President Biden is pushing. It infects a lot of big businesses as well, affects the academy. We want to do something there. And recently I talked to a couple of older women whose children are transgender, that we never used to have this problem. I think it's made a cool, the government makes it out a cool way to rebel, and it'd be good if the government stopped doing that.
Congressman Glenn Grothman, good to have you back again.
Thanks.
Thank you so
Honored
much, sir.
to be here.
And if you have a newsmaker in your town who you think we should have on this program, let us know about it. Send us an email to tips@wearegreenbay.com, or you can message us on Facebook. And be sure to join us once again Sunday morning at 7. Until then, have a great day.